I've never been the type to make enemies. I always thought that about myself. But considering the current situation, it seems that just by breathing, one can somehow make enemies. This crossed my mind when I received the official notice from the director, Steve. My name is James. I'm a 36-year-old mid-level employee at a construction company. I got a job at a well-known local construction firm right after high school. My parents were thrilled when I landed the job, as it was a reputable company in our area. I chose not to go to college simply because I wanted to start earning money as soon as possible. I have 4 younger brothers. It was only natural for me as the eldest to want to help support my parents financially. I was never particularly fond of studying and had no real interest in pursuing a college degree. My first year on the job was like a crash course in life, so busy I can hardly remember it. Though the workplace was demanding, I found it fulfilling. I was the only high school graduate to join the company that year. I could feel the gap I had to bridge from the very first day of work. Luckily, I was surrounded by supportive colleagues. No one looked down on me for being a high school graduate back then. When I first joined the company, there wasn't anyone like that. By the time I was 28, I had grown to be known as one of the most promising of my peers. One day, Mr. Smith, a client, suggested I consider a matchmaking. Mr. Smith, a close friend of our CEO Mr. Anderson, and a client, always had a soft spot for me, having joined the company straight out of high school. I learned everything from how to drink to high-end dining etiquette from Mr. Smith. I often visited Mr. Smith's home with Mr. Anderson. I couldn't possibly refuse the matchmaking proposal from Mr. Smith, especially since the other party was Mr. Smith's daughter. While the term CEO's daughter might conjure an image of a demure and delicate lady, Charlotte was anything but the stereotypical executive's daughter. She graduated from an industrial high school with a major in architecture and studied urban design engineering in college. I've seen her at construction sites, asking the workers various questions. Unconcerned about messing up her hair, she'd wear a safety helmet and observe passionately. I first met her at a construction site. She was visiting the site I was assisting as a site supervisor. I believe it was when she was still in high school, dressed in her uniform, wearing a white helmet. She greeted me politely. I heard that her well-composed features resemble her mother's. Her name is Charlotte. When she found out I was the assistant site supervisor, her large eyes widened even more in surprise. As we bumped into each other at various sites, we started to share personal stories. Having 4 younger brothers, Charlotte's presence felt like having a sister, and I was glad she came to rely on me for many things. To me, she was always Mr. Smith's precious daughter and like a sister. We both knew there was mutual affection. But crossing that line seemed like a difficult choice for both of us. The matchmaking proposal came up in Charlotte's graduating year from college. Yes, I would like to proceed with the matchmaking. I responded immediately to Mr. Smith's proposal. I remember being genuinely happy that the time had come when we no longer had to hide our feelings for each other. But this is where life gets tricky. The news of my matchmaking with Mr. Smith's daughter spread quickly within the company. While all my peers congratulated me, there were some who didn't take it well. I was a bit carried away and completely forgot about them. And that's when I was plunged into hell. I'll never forget it. It was the day before the arranged marriage meeting. When Al from my department told me to go to the director's office, I had a bad feeling. Steve, the son of Mr. Anderson, has never gotten along with me. Probably because Mr. Anderson and Mr. Smith treated me like a son, which Steve didn't like. Mr. Anderson once said, "Steve has always been rebellious, but his attitude in the company is also bad. He's created his own faction within the company, and lately, He's been opposing everything Mr. Anderson does. Unfortunately, many in the company have been won over by Steve, and those of us loyal to Mr. Anderson fear to take over might be happening. After a brief knock, I called out and received a brusque comment in response. Inside the director's office, Steve and some executives were lined up. "I'm sorry to say this right before your meeting with Charlotte from the Smith family, but could you go to branch 13? Steve said with a spiteful smile. I was so taken aback I could only utter a dumbfounded huh. Branch 13 is a remote southern island, far from headquarters. This wasn't just a transfer, it was a demotion. Steve watched my reaction with amusement, while his cronies snickered and laughed behind me. I realized then that this was a done deal. Mr. Anderson has been hospitalized due to illness since last month. This transfer must have been forcefully arranged by Steve. I clenched my fists, determined to stay calm. I refused to show any sign of distress. I accepted the official notice as if it were nothing and left the director's office. Inside, I was seething with anger. Thus, on the eve of my long-anticipated meeting with Charlotte, I faced this unfortunate demotion. One should never make someone hold a grudge against you. On the day of the arranged meeting, leaving Charlotte in tears was the lowest I've ever felt. I haven't been in touch with Mr. Smith since then. It's been 8 years since I was transferred to this remote island branch. There's been no sign of returning to headquarters, especially since Mr. Anderson passed away 3 years ago. Now, Steve, the one who banished me here, is the CEO. It seems my peers who were loyal to Mr. Anderson were suddenly fired. They probably thought I couldn't do anything from this island. I wasn't fired, but here I remain. Mornings come early on the island. Since coming here, I've taken up surfing. There's a shallow beach with good waves, attracting many tourists for surfing. With few other industries, the island relies on tourism. My work involves the construction of small resort hotels, villas, and pensions, among other things. There's also a fair amount of repair work, keeping us reasonably busy. The branch office consists of me, 2 young craftsmen, and 1 local administrative worker. The atmosphere here is relaxed and friendly. The peace here is unbelievable, considering how at headquarters there were constant clashes between Steve's faction and those loyal to Mr. Anderson. After 8 years, I've grown accustomed to this peaceful life and have started dreading the idea of returning to headquarters. Before work, I head to the sea and catch a few waves before going to the office. And during lunch, I gaze at the calm sea. Lately, I've had more desk work, so I make a point of looking out at the distant view, which makes me seem like I'm always staring out the window. James, you're staring at the sea again. Clara, the administrative worker, often teases me. When I first arrived, I felt anxious and lonely. Not to mention guilty for abruptly canceling on Charlotte. But with 8 years gone by, even that feeling has faded. By now, she must be around 30 years old. She's probably built a wonderful life with a great husband. The thought still occasionally stings deep in my heart. Sometimes it feels like a minor wound, other times it's a deep, sinking feeling. Well, they say time heals all wounds. With time, these feelings should fade away. I just hadn't given it enough time yet. Every time that twinge of pain hits my heart, I remind myself of this. Looks like you've got a slow day. The one who called out to me as I was absently gazing out the window was Ethan. He's a reliable older brother figure, 2 years my senior, who moved to this remote island. He runs a small ranch and offers horseback riding to tourists. Sometimes, he hosts students who are truant from school or children with certain issues for extended stays at his ranch. They engage in horse care and receive horse therapy, healing their wounded hearts. If you don't have work, Why not take the day off? He teased me, and I retorted, I do have work. Ethan, with his deeply tanned face, gave a broad grin and looked at me skeptically, saying, sure you do. Ethan, you shouldn't bother someone who's working. Suddenly, a voice as clear as a bell rang out. Behind the tall figure of Ethan, a woman with a face I hadn't seen on the island stood. Her fair skin indicated she had recently arrived. Her long black hair contrasted with her pale skin, making her look like a princess from a fairy tale, I thought. Clara nudged me, saying, James, you're staring too much, as I was transfixed by her. It's been a while since you've seen a beauty like her, right? She's my cousin and she's going to help out at the ranch starting today. She just arrived at the port. Ethan introduced her, and she greeted me. I greeted her back, caught up in the moment. I'm Amanda. Nice to meet you. Her smile took me by surprise. There was an air of sophistication about her, or perhaps a sense of good upbringing. Though her personality and appearance seemed completely opposite, she somehow reminded me of Charlotte. I couldn't tell if the flutter in my heart was because of the memories of Charlotte or because of Amanda's smile. All I knew was that a restlessness began stirring within me. Tonight, we're having a welcome party for her at our place. Want to come? You wouldn't have anything better to do back at your apartment, right? Ethan said, turning on his heel without waiting for my reply. I shrugged and thought, well, can't be helped, scratching my head. That evening, I pondered what to bring to Amanda's welcome party and finally chose fruit wine. It's made on the island and is popular among women, even off the island. Not sure if she liked alcohol. I also bought some non-alcoholic juice just in case. Ethan's ranch is near the sea, not too far from my company apartment. Good evening, may I come in? I called out as usual and opened the door, to be greeted by Amanda in an apron. Welcome, I'm sorry for calling you over like this on such short notice, she said, looking a bit apologetic, perhaps mindful of the forceful invitation earlier. Not at all. I was looking forward to coming here tonight. Here's a little gift. Do you drink? I said, quickly dismissing her concerns, and she smiled, relieved. The table was set with dishes I'd never seen when it was just Ethan and me drinking. Clearly, Amanda had prepared them. It's her welcome party, but she wouldn't just sit down and relax, Ethan said, frowning from behind the kitchen counter. I can't let a busy person like you bother with such things. If you say you can't eat my cooking, then I might reconsider, she retorted with a firmness that belied her gentle appearance. Ethan seemed a bit taken aback. As I sat at the dining table, Ethan quickly placed a glass in front of me. Didn't you bring something? Let's drink, he said, as if he had seen right through me, which was a bit annoying, but I handed over the fruit wine I had brought. In fact, this fruit wine was Ethan's favorite. I knew you'd bring it, he said excitedly, uncorking the bottle, while Amanda chuckled softly. She's probably in her late 20s, I guessed, unconsciously comparing her with Charlotte, who would be around the same age. I hope it suits your taste. Amanda served the dishes onto small plates, lining them up in front of me. Each looked delicious, to my amazement. I tasted the food. I was at a loss for words due to its deliciousness. When something is truly delicious, the word delicious doesn't come out immediately. I almost stomped my feet on the spot in delight. Ethan watched my reaction with an amused look. You're really starved for home-cooked meals, aren't you? He said, pityingly. I felt embarrassed to be pitied. Amanda seemed to get embarrassed by my repeated praises of this as delicious and hid in the kitchen. If you like Amanda's cooking so much, why don't you marry her? She hasn't gotten married no matter how much time passes, Ethan whispered, making sure Amanda couldn't hear him from the kitchen. It seemed she was still single. I can't believe such a beautiful person is still single, I said honestly, and the usually hearty Ethan made a face as if he had bitten into a bitter bug. There's a lot going on, a lot, he said, and then fell silent, taking a swig of his drink. Even someone as obtuse as me could tell there was a sensitive issue from Ethan's demeanor. "Hey, Amanda, why don't you take this guy with you for horseback riding practice tomorrow?" Ethan suddenly suggested to Amanda, who was in the kitchen. "Tomorrow is Saturday. I have the day off. It seems he wants her to treat me as a customer for the medium-distance horse riding they usually do for tourists. Originally, she's a horse rider, having won equestrian competitions, so she's quite skilled. I've been on this island for 8 years but have never tried horse trekking. If you don't mind, I'd really appreciate it. I've never tried it before." I raised my voice so Amanda in the kitchen could hear. "I'd actually ask you for the favor. I want to become helpful to Ethan as soon as possible," she said, coming out of the kitchen. I echoed her sentiment, saying, "I'd appreciate it too." "You two sound like you're at a matchmaking meeting," Ethan muttered, making us look up. "Don't tease," I blurted out, probably blushing. In my haste, I didn't notice Amanda had fallen silent with a complex expression. The next morning, after surfing as usual, I got out of the sea just after 9 a.m. The horse trekking appointment is at 10 a.m. After a quick breakfast, I headed to the ranch. There, Amanda was receiving a lecture from Ethan on how to handle customers. There are many precautions, especially for first-time riders. She was taking detailed notes during the lecture, her profile showing intense concentration. I quietly watched them until they noticed me. Eventually, Ethan saw me and beckoned. "If you're here, just say something," he said. "Well, I didn't want to interrupt your serious instruction," I replied. While Ethan and I were talking, Amanda was steadily getting ready. Following Ethan's instructions, she briefed me on the precautions for horse trekking and then quickly got on a horse in the enclosure to teach me the basics of riding. Being on a horse for the first time, the height was more intimidating than I had imagined. I repeated standing up and sitting down in rhythm with the horse. "You're doing well. You have a good feel for it," she complimented. Unexpectedly praised, I felt a bit happy. She told me it was okay to keep my buttocks on the saddle when we moved outside, which was a relief. After all, my muscles would have screamed if we kept up that rhythm for a long time. After about 20 minutes of instruction, we finally started the outdoor ride. Amanda led the way on her horse, slowly moving in front of me. The beach was just across a road, and enjoying horseback riding on the beach is a selling point of their horse trekking. The horse was well trained. It followed the lead horse quietly. I barely had to do anything. By the time I felt the sea breeze on my cheeks, my fear had vanished, replaced by an exhilarating feeling I had never experienced before. All I could hear was the soft crunch of the horse's hooves on the fine sand and the gentle sound of the waves. The beloved scent of the sea and the sea breeze. The sea surface, illuminated by the morning sun, sparkled and reflected beautifully. "It feels great. This is the best," I found myself saying without thinking. "I'm glad to hear you say that," turning her horse's face towards me and approaching. Her long hair fluttered in the wind. Her hands, lifting her hair, were slender and pale, almost glowing in the early summer sunlight. "Did Ethan say anything to you about me yesterday?" she suddenly asked, catching me off guard. I thought she hadn't heard Ethan's suggestion to entrust her to me. With her earnest eyes fixed on me, I couldn't lie. I honestly repeated what Ethan had mentioned the night before. "Maybe he was just drunk. You know how he starts joking around when he's drunk," I said to try to smooth things over. At that moment, Amanda turned her back to me, controlling her horse. Her back seemed to tremble slightly, and I panicked, wondering if she was crying. "You know Ethan doesn't get drunk," she said almost angrily, then steered her horse towards the water's edge. Without a chance to stop her, She rode into the sea with her horse. The horse seemed to enjoy walking in the water. They eventually going deep enough to swim. "It feels so good. Why don't you join me?" she called out, then whistled sharply. It seemed to be a signal. The horse I was on started to enter the water as well. Riding a horse into the sea was another first for me. It was scary at first. But as I got used to the waves through the horse's back, the vibration and the horse's warmth felt incredibly soothing. Minor worries seemed insignificant. With my eyes closed, feeling the wave sounds and the horse's breathing, I sensed Amanda approaching. I came here for Ethan. I love him and wanted to be by his side, so I followed him to this island. "I guess you could call me an uninvited wife," she confessed unexpectedly. Her confession brought me back to reality. They were cousins, after all. He's just scared. Legally, he could marry me, but he's running away because he's worried about what people and relatives might think, even though he loves me deeply, she said. Her profile, as she bit her lip in frustration, looked like that of a warrior woman taking on a challenging battle. "That's probably why he tried to ask you something strange last night," she surmised. For her to openly declare to love Ethan, it felt strange, like I'd fallen out of love even before I ever fell in love with her. My best friend still talks wistfully about being abandoned right before marrying the man she loved. I don't want to become a woman who clings to the past. On our way back to the ranch, she said that in a strong tone. Listening more closely, I was taken aback. She revealed that her friend was turned down at a matchmaking meeting by the man she loved. Charlotte's face flashed in my mind. It couldn't be such a coincidence. I took several deep breaths to calm my racing heart. But that effort was in vain as we approached the ranch. There were two figures there, Ethan and another person. I couldn't believe my eyes and squinted for a better look. There was no mistaking it. It was Charlotte, grown into a woman. "Everyone's worried because you disappeared so suddenly. I had a hard time stopping your parents from going to the police," Charlotte scolded Amanda from atop her horse. But Amanda seemed unapologetic. "Are you going on about what society will think again? My life is my own. What's wrong with living it the way I want?" She dismounted the horse gracefully and handed the reins to Ethan, facing Charlotte directly. Contrasting with Amanda's long black hair and pale skin, Charlotte had a tan, sported very short bright hair, and her ears sparkled with several piercings. Yet, it was Charlotte, who appeared more lively, who had tears in her eyes, while Amanda, with her hands clasped in front of her chest, seemed irritated, tapping her fingers rhythmically. Everyone has their circumstances, right? There are things in life. We can't live as freely as we wish. Amanda scoffed through her nose at Charlotte, who was pleading in a voice mixed with tears. "You really haven't changed at all. Hating to be called a president's daughter, you deliberately dress like that and act tomboyish," Amanda remarked. At Amanda's words, Charlotte's shoulders twitched sharply. Perhaps she felt humiliated for being hit right on the mark. Amanda didn't stop her onslaught, even as Charlotte looked down. "But your essence hasn't changed, has it? Always worried about what society thinks, always being considerate of others, giving up on what's important to you, and living a life of regret. I'd rather not live like that," Amanda said. Charlotte, not wanting to hear any more, covered her ears with her hands and crouched down. "Shut up, shut up, shut up. I know that, I don't want to hear it." I couldn't bear Charlotte's voice, which sounded almost like a scream. Jumping off the horse, I embraced Charlotte's hunched shoulders. Her slender shoulders were trembling slightly. "Do you remember me, Charlotte?" When I softly spoke to her, Charlotte's body stiffened. Holding her breath, she slowly looked up at me, her large eyes widening. In her eyes moistened with tears, my reflection was clearly visible. "No, it can't be." In a dazed state, Charlotte murmured repeatedly. "It's not a lie. "It's me, James," I affirmed. Hearing my name, Charlotte's strength seemed to drain away. I supported her with both arms. "So, you're the one Charlotte has been longing for," Amanda remarked, squatting beside us. "Your legs must have given out from the shock, Charlotte." Amanda spoke to Charlotte in a teasing tone. Charlotte, her cheeks flushed red, retorted in a barely audible voice, "Shut up, Charlotte. This is a chance given by God. What you do with it is up to you," Amanda said, patting Charlotte's shoulder lightly, as if comforting a child. "I want you to be happy. After all, you're the only friend of a selfish person like me," Amanda said, standing up and smiling. "Take good care of Charlotte." I nodded firmly, and with a reassured expression, she left us to tend to the horses. "James, I need to tell you something. I wanted to chase after you just like Amanda did back then," Charlotte confessed. "From the first time we met at the construction site, she had liked me," she said. She laughed bitterly as she talked about feeling hopeless about everything after being rejected at the arranged meeting. Regretting not being able to cling to me or chase after me because of societal expectations and her parents' views, she made me think of how inadequate my actions were. If I had just said, "Please wait for me," back then, she would have waited, I thought. Failing to fully believe in her and to take her away, I was truly a coward. I admired Amanda, you know. Even though everyone opposed her and Ethan treated her coldly, she never gave up, Charlotte said. She laughed at herself, saying she never had the confidence to be loved like Amanda. I felt the same way. Taking a deep breath, I looked straight into Charlotte's eyes. She seemed to hold her breath. "Please don't say it's too late now. If you're still single, and if you still love me, can we start over from that day?" I asked. Hearing my words, big tears fell from Charlotte's eyes. "I've always loved you. I still do, and I probably always will," Charlotte spoke with a clear tone, just like Amanda. I thought she mustered all her courage and took a step forward. "I'll definitely make you happy. Stay with me forever," I promised. She nodded repeatedly in response to my words. I forcefully held back the tears that threatened to overflow. This wasn't the time to cry. I had decided to make her the happiest person in the world from now on. Amanda gave a sharp whistle. It sounded almost like she was saying,